You sit in church week after week, embracing the truth of God's word. You believe the gospel and claim Jesus Christ as your Lord. Yet you continue to struggle with pornography. You feel like a hypocrite, returning to the sin you hate that mocks the God you love. You desperately wonder, is lasting freedom even possible? Yes, you can overcome pornography, but not alone. 2 Timothy 2:22 says, "Now flee from youthful lusts and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart." Only by repeatedly running from sin to Christ with other believers can you hope to enjoy lasting freedom. You can live with purity and integrity. Take courage, seek accountability, and do whatever is necessary. Get equipped at accountable2you.com.
What we must be is a people that are ready to war for truth, for righteousness, for the kingdom. In short, what we need to do is we need to dress up for the occasion, ladies and gentlemen. To forsake the cliches of the secular and the cliches of the Christian culture. And we need to march to a different tune that's led by angelic choirs rather than masqueraded demons. Because Satan knows the crucial target. He's seen the war. He knows where to target. He has inspected the holy places. He knows where the weaknesses of your faith are. And so we uphold it. We defend the faith together this week. We defend the faith once and for all, delivered to the saints. We need to understand what precisely are the devil's schemes. We need to learn to speak the truth boldly. We need to fight for the kingdom and to live rightly in the sight of God and man. And so this evening and throughout this week, you are called to be a priestly people. The kind of priestly people that engages the darkest enemy that you'll ever engage. And you're going to engage the darkest enemy, whose name we know, Satan. And we're going to engage him not mildly. We're going to engage him by wearing our baptismal attire, by wearing that which God has given us. We carry the name of Jesus wherever we go because Jesus is our righteousness.
Hey y'all, welcome to Business Makers, and excited about what we have going for you today. But before we get into our interview, you can follow our Twitter account, Business Makers. It's at Business Makers for our Twitter account. And then make sure you guys sign up for our pre-conference, Business Makers pre-conference, which is the Thursday afternoon of October 31st. And then our main conference kicks off that night, that Thursday night, for the Fight, Laugh, Feast Prodigal America Conference. So the speakers we have for Thursday afternoon Business Makers pre-conferences, we have Isaac Bakken from, T-Rex. We have Darren Doan with his Doan Agency. And then we have, also speaking, is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room on the Blaze TV network. So we're excited, very excited about the pre-conference of what we have going on there. And then me, Cross Politic, the Cross Politic guys, we do a roundtable with the speakers after words. It's very fast-paced afternoon conference, Thursday afternoon. We have hundreds of business leaders, CEOs, entrepreneurs that show up for that pre-conference event. It's an exciting time. So make sure you join us there. So for today, I have Valar Atomics, Isaiah Taylor. It probably says Valor on your Twitter. We'll change that later, but it's VALAR. Valar Atomics with Isaiah Taylor. Isaiah is the founder of an auto shop, Erber Auto, in 2017, still in our town. Good auto shop here. He founded Hood Hub, an Internet of Things startup with a focus on automotive applications in 2019. And then in 2023, he started Valar Atomics. So Isaiah, thank you so much for coming on the show, man.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's Valar Atomics, and this is what I get for picking a Tolkien name to start my company. But
yeah, you had me straightened out at the beginning, and then we went away, and then I come back and I say the wrong thing all over again.
Yeah, it's fine. It's just it starts conversations about Tolkien, which is great. So mission accomplished.
Yeah, there you go. So Valar Atomics, you started that in 2023, and it was more of just an idea.
It's an idea that I've been working on for about 5 or 6 years, and last year kind of went from it went through the final stage of the idea where I knew that I could actually commercialize it, and so started the company a few months ago. I would say we really kind of started around October of last year. Started hiring our first people and getting serious. So but it's been a long journey.
Yeah, so we'll get there. First, tell me what Valar Atomics is. What's the goal of the company? And then I want to talk about how you took this idea into getting fundraising capital for it.
Sure. So what do we do? That's the first question. What do we do? What's the mission?
What is Valar?
So Valar, we are trying to make much cheaper hydrocarbons. So jet fuel, diesel, natural gas, gasoline, all of the hydrocarbons that you normally get from the oil and gas industry. Mm-hmm. We are trying to sell those, and we think we can actually make them a lot cheaper. Mm-hmm. And the way that we do that is we use mass manufactured nuclear reactors. So this is going to sound a little bit counterintuitive, but the right way to think about it is sort of reversing combustion. So in a combustion engine, like a car or an airplane, you have a hydrocarbon which came out of the ground and was refined in an oil refinery, and it gets combined with oxygen in the engine, and it produces a bunch of heat, and that heat is turned into useful work in your car. And then out the backside of your car comes water and CO2. Yep. And so water and CO2 are put into the atmosphere, and you can kind of think about what we do as reversing this process and sort of rebuilding useful fuels out of exhaust that's in the air. So there's CO2 and water in the air. We basically take those and we rebuild them into fuel again to be reused. And
you'll pull them out of the air and rebuild them into fuel.
Yeah, in the longest term, we'll pull it all straight out of the air. In the short term, there's a lot of places where we can buy those two ingredients. It's a little bit circuitous. So like we can buy CO2 from coal plants and from nat gas plants. In the very long term, we will just pull it straight out of the air. But there's a lot cheaper sources to get in the early days. Okay. But that's the fundamental thing that we're doing. We're building hydrocarbons manually rather than getting them out of the crust of the earth. And the reason we're doing that is we think it's actually going to be a lot cheaper. So oil refining is awesome. I love it. It's been powering humanity for the last 200 years. Right. But it's about as cheap as it can get now. And the reason for that is it's distributed. So there's oil, below the crust, and then these wells, and you have to go find it, and then you have to drill for it, and then you have to pipe it to a refining station. And then you have to build the refinery, and you have to refine the oil. And so it goes through tons of different steps to get to like a useful fuel. Mm-hmm. And our process is a lot simpler. We have nuclear reactors, we have CO2 and water, and we basically just make the CO2 and water extremely hot through a variety of catalysts and chemical cycles, and build a useful fuel. Mm-hmm. So we think it could be cheaper.
So you keep using the term hydrocarbons. Mm-hmm. And when I assume it's when you're referring to oil.
Yeah, correct. So hydrocarbons are, they're a classic chemical made up of hydrogen and carbon. And it's this really, really awesome class of chemicals that really powers the modern world. I mean, almost everything around you is in the commercial world. It's either made of hydrocarbons or powered by hydrocarbons. Right. Just looking around this room, I've got like, some foam on the wall that keeps it quiet in here. That's entirely made of hydrocarbons. There's a plastic box next to me entirely made of hydrocarbons. Mm-hmm. Almost everything that's not metal or wood in the modern world is made of hydrocarbons. And they're a really powerful and awesome system. Really a testament to how God put the world together, because they kind of mimic how plants work. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like a synthetic plant body, if you want to think about it that way.
Right. So just to I'm a novice. I'm a dummy here. So basically, when you're saying hydrocarbons, you're talking specifically to oil and kind of that converting into gas and then becoming a kind of an explosive,
Yeah,
environment for your car. Heat explosive
useful
environment for your car.
fuels.
Yeah. Okay,
Useful
very good.
fuels. Yeah.
And then so I'm again clarifying here. You're basically Valor is basically going to kind of reverse that process. It's going to take the CO2 out of the air, mixed with oxygen, and will become a flammable for fuel. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's the CO2 in the water. So water is H2O. CO2 is obviously CO2, and we take the H2 out of the water and we take the C out of the CO2, and that's the hydrogen and the carbon. We rebuild the hydrocarbon.
Okay.
And the common element in both of those is oxygen. And we basically put the oxygen back in the atmosphere. We take the hydrogen, the carbon, and then we distribute that as a useful fuel.
Yeah. So in what form will that fuel be? Liquid, gas?
It will, yes. So like we want to basically slot into the existing oil and gas industry 1-to-1. So if Valor succeeds, you will probably not notice a difference other than that the gas is a lot cheaper. So you will still pump gas at the gas pump. You'll still fill up your diesel truck. You'll go to the airport and they'll put jet fuel in it. But that material should be much, much cheaper. From our,
I see.
they're not really refineries because we're not refining oil, but they serve the same function, which is they create a spectrum of hydrocarbons, which we sell into the market.
Okay. And so where's the process at? Like, have you produced any fuel yet? Like, where are you guys at in this process?
So we have produced a small canister. I should have brought it into the room of hydrocarbons. And making hydrocarbons is kind of the easier part. There's a lot of people who know how to make synthetic fuels from CO2 and water. Well, actually, CO2 and hydrogen is how people know how to do it really well today. The thing that is really unique about what we're doing is making the hydrogen from water using nuclear energy. And the reason that's really important is that all synthetic fuel plays today are many times more expensive than oil and gas. And the reason that people are doing them has nothing to do with making energy cheaper. It's because they want to make energy carbon neutral or something like that. They have a separate reason for trying to move away from oil and gas. I kind of came to it from a completely different direction, which is I was trying to figure out how to make energy cheaper. Yeah. And I started on the nuclear side, and I realized like nuclear is the way that we make energy cheaper, but nuclear has this distribution problem where it's very hard to distribute the energy that you make from a nuclear reactor because you have to distribute it through the energy grid, the electricity grid. Right. And the electricity grid is surprisingly difficult to move energy around. Right. And so instead, we basically load that nuclear energy into chemical fuels and distribute that instead. I see we have a couple comments, by the way. I think there's a few people hassling me in the comments here. That'll be fun.
Yes. Someone thinks the government paid for your wooden door behind you.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, no, we're entirely privately funded. It's entirely possible that we will take DOE funding, something like that. But no, we're entirely privately funded today.
Yeah. So what is it going to take to be able to get to kind of the mass production of your fuel?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're going to have to obviously make a lot of nuclear reactors. That's the really hard part. Making nuclear reactors is not just a technological problem; it's a societal problem. It's a political problem. You have to clear a lot. You have to clear a lot out of the way in order to get that to happen. And so the way that we're going to tackle that is we're going to start very small. So we start with a very small reactor. We make it here in-house. We were actually just, before we hopped on, the reason I was late, I have got my Apple Vision Pro, and we were looking at the full reactor render of the first reactor we're making in our space here, which was so cool to see in full scale, walking around it and actually looking at exactly where it's going to be. The reason we did that is we realized that the roof might be a little bit too low in here. We might have to poke a hole in the roof in order to fit the first prototype in here. But so we start small. We make a reactor. We make another one. We make another one. And basically what we're going to do is kind of make them at increasing power levels until we get to something that's commercializable. And then we go make 100 of them, in a factory setting. And and then we kind of make what will look like an oil refinery, where we have a lot of these bolted down on a site. But the difference between this and a normal oil refinery is that instead of buying crude oil, we'll buy CO2 and water, which are a lot cheaper than crude. And so that's kind of where the
Right.
margin comes from.
Right. Nuclear. Do you got to get licensed to be able to, do that? I mean, like, what's because obviously the government has absolutely put all sorts of roadblocks around nuclear.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of the whole game. Like nuclear is not really an engineering problem at this point. It's a political and it's a political and licensing problem. And so our strategy for that is basically to, we kind of believe that like regulators really want to see data. They want to see things working. And there's a bit of a chicken and egg problem here where it's like, well, they want to see it working, but in order to get it working, you have to go through licensing. And so like, how do you start that process? And our answer to that question is, again, to start very, very small. Yeah. So we're starting with an extremely low power, small reactor that has a really low risk profile. And then we gain capability over time. So we start with an extremely small reactor, and then we make it a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And we bring the regulators along with us. And, it's a lot slower than nuclear should be, I believe. But the right way to fix that is not really to, complain about it. It's to start building and fix the problem. So that's what we're doing.
Right. Is California a nuclear friendly state?
No, it's not. What California is the place where the best engineers in the world are. If you are starting, and I'll say engineers both in software and hardware, this is still kind of the place where there's just, at this point, 6-7 decades of heritage of building extremely hard things. And the California state government has worked very hard to, push entrepreneurs out, push businesses out, push smart people out. But at the end of the day, it actually turns out that like a community of people who are building hard things kind of matters more than whatever the government is doing. And it could be at some point that like it gets so bad you just can't do business here. But for now, like this is still by far really the only place that you can work on the hardest technical problems in the world, in my opinion.
Why do you need software developers right now?
We don't need an enormous amount of software. I was just saying in general, like if you're working on hard tech, either in software, like, if you're doing AI, San Francisco is really the only place that has like the world-class talent. If you're doing hardware, I think LA is really the spot that has world-class talent. And, but no, California is not a nuclear friendly state. We won't turn the first reactor on here in California. We're R&D here. Yeah, no, we're not going to turn the first one on here. Yeah, R&D will be here, and we'll flick the first one on somewhere else.
Wow. So it seems like the runway here to get to market, just guessing here, I mean, I don't know the complications, but you're talking like 5 to 8 years, just even get to a place where you can maybe even start building your production facilities.
Yeah, my current timeline, I would say about 8 years to the kind of like success mark that I have for the business is when the majority of our research and development budget comes from cash flow from our fuel rather than from external funding.
Right.
And I think that's kind of when businesses hit an inflection point, is when their R&D budget is not primarily funded by selling equity in their company. It's funded by their own cash flow. For SpaceX, that took about 15 years. So it took about 15 years of R&D for them to go from, we're raising, it's not that they stopped raising money, it's that the money they raised beyond that point was to pour fire on their growth story rather than to fund R&D. And so I put that point for us about 8 or 9 years from now.
Yeah. Interesting. How are you getting investors to believe in you for 8 years? Right? Because it's like, this is really high risk from an investor standpoint. First of all, I have to trust Isaiah that he can do this. Like he can see this all the way through. And then secondly, there's such a long runway of putting money into the company without seeing any return. On top of like, well, do I trust Isaiah and he's the man to do this?
Yeah. So on the like runway question and putting in money that you're not going to see for a long time, I would say like that definitely filters who we work with. We tend to work with people who think very long term and who want to see you know, the metric here is like they don't want to see a $100 million company after 5 years. They want to see a $100 billion company after 20 years.
Right.
Like
Right.
that's the right type of investor, and there
Right.
are those investors out there. I would say like they're rarer than they used to be, especially kind of people's mindsets changed during like ZIRP era, zero interest rate policy era,
Yeah.
especially around COVID. There
Yeah.
was so much free money in the system.
Right.
It was basically all about, can you make the hypey buck? Can you go and toss $50 million into something that's going to 3x in 6 months, and then can you
Right.
sell out of that? And there's a bunch
Right.
of stuff going on in crypto. So everybody kind of started thinking short term in the last 4 years. But actually, since then, I think that there's been a pretty good reset to people beginning to think in long term equities
Long-term
again.
Yeah.
But also, there's been a through line throughout that entire process of investors who never lost their minds during that, and those are really the best
Yeah.
people to work with.
Yeah. What how much have you raised, and how much do you think you're going to need to raise through that 8-year process?
Yeah, so we've raised a few million to date, and we'll probably, to get to that point that I spoke of where, our like financing of the company no longer goes into R&D. It'll be probably $500 million is my current guess.
Yeah. Wow. Are you where are you finding these post-mill investors?
That's a good question. Yeah, my investors so far are not explicitly post-mill, but there is a certain flavor to that that's unavoidable, which is like
Certainly.
you have to be able to see the future,
Uh-huh.
and you have to be able to believe that the future is capable of being better than the past in order to be an investor, and especially to be a long-term investor. You tend to just be an optimist. I think if you're a long-termist, you're also an optimist, and so we look for that in people. One of the things that I ask investors that I work with is like, how many humans, can Earth support? Like, how many people do we cap out at on Earth?
Right.
And
Right.
if they say a number that's less than the number of humans alive today, I automatically know, this is not going to work. And what I
Mhm.
want to hear is like, oh, I don't know, 100 billion, like some massive number.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
like it just, are you thinking about the world, getting worse and worse, or are you thinking about it getting better?
Right.
And if you're a long-term investor, you should definitely think about the latter.
Yeah. What do you what has the oil and gas industry discovered you, found out about you? I can imagine that they're going to put all sorts of roadblocks in your way if this begins to get any traction.
I don't think so. Yes, like I've certainly talked to a lot of the existing players, and I think that they actually want something like this to hit because, you know, oil and gas has kind of gotten a bad rap in the last like 50 or 60 years for shutting down
Yeah.
alternative concepts. There's certainly been some funny business.
Okay.
But the fact is, like, oil and gas, as awesome as it's been, is a little bit tapped out. Like it's about it kind of peaked in terms of, the cost that it could deliver a product to the market,
Mhm. Mhm.
and the scale it could do that at. We could certainly drill more. There's lots of things we could do to make oil cheaper today. Like, we could allow drilling, we could allow the Keystone Pipeline, Keystone XL, all these
Yep.
things,
Yep.
and those would definitely affect the price, but they wouldn't make energy like 10 times cheaper,
Yeah.
right? And that's actually important because energy has been getting progressively cheaper for the last 300 or 400 years.
Right.
From the discovery, we were using like whale oil for like a really long time in human history. And if
Right.
you think about it, we were actually all using solar power because plants are growing, absorbing energy from the sun. We eat the plants,
Yeah.
calories give us energy. So like we were on like solar and whale oil. And then we
Uh-huh.
figured out coal, and
Yeah.
coal was this huge power up. And then we figured out oil, and oil was this huge power up. And each of those power ups were like huge step step changes in the abundance and cost of energy.
Mhm.
And I think we're kind of at that limit with oil and gas, where it could get a little bit cheaper if we eased up on regulations, but it's not going to get 2 times, 3 times, 4 times cheaper.
Mhm.
And so I think like the existing oil and gas industry is like ready for that innovation to happen.
Mhm. What talk your pitch to me. I know you don't want to give away all your secret sauce or whatever, but kind of talk like, what is your pitch for these long-term thinking unicorn investors?
Yeah. So, I mean, unicorn, like long-term unicorn investors, like they want to see a really, really big problem in a really big market. They want to see something that, if
Hmm.
you are right, really matters, and if you win, really matters, right?
Hmm.
So, a lot of times people, I think, if they have a hard time raising money, a lot of times it's just because like the problem they're trying to solve is not that big,
Hmm.
and there are lots of investors who will fund like a smaller problem, but it's a different type of person. And like you should probably start with friends and family and like angel networks. But if you're going, like, people tend to see like big flashy VC brand names,
Yep.
and they're like, oh, I'm going to go take my dog walking app to them. It's like, that's not really what they're in the market for.
Right.
So one, yeah, just a really big thing off the bat is like going for an extremely, extremely hard problem um, has built-in advantages to being able to
Hmm.
raise money. Um, and Yeah, I mean, frankly, like the pitch is really exciting. I think there's a lot of investors that want to see energy become cheaper for mankind. There's
Right.
a there's a really, really hard to understand um, importance to the cost of energy. It kind of underlies every other economic activity. Everything that we do has like a little energy price line embedded in it. And for
Hmm.
some activities, that's a really big price line. So like if you're flying or traveling at all, energy cost is like this huge proportion of your cost. But it kind
Right.
of underlies everything. And so if you can make it cheaper, like you've made the entire world more productive overnight.
Right.
And that's really
Uh-huh.
exciting.
Right. No, and that's it's kind of like you look at everyone's car, everyone's house, everyone's plane, everything that
Yeah.
requires my riding lawnmower, everything that
Yeah.
requires fuel,
Yeah.
and you bring the cost down. So um you're projecting that you could bring costs down. I think you said something earlier, something like 10 times.
So yeah, nuclear fission has the ability to massively, massively decrease the cost of energy.
Okay.
Um, and I think that like anyone who's working in nuclear fission and wants to scale that out knows that like when nuclear fission is scaled,
Mhm.
it's not just 10 times cheaper than existing energy. Like it could be 100 times cheaper.
Mhm.
The thing that's like actually important is a commercially viable solution to get there over time.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing, like I think that people who work in nuclear fusion, which is different than fission, kind of talk a lot about how good fusion is, but there's no
Mhm.
real commercial plan to go from like the theoretical science to like, okay, now this is actually how it gets into the market. So yeah, I think like the first goal for us is really to slot into the existing nat gas, kerosene, diesel, gasoline market, and frankly to make a ton of money.
Yeah.
And the reason that's important is like if you make a ton of money on a technology, you actually get the opportunity to scale that technology and make it cheaper. Because
Mhm.
the way that technology works in capitalism is when you do something a lot, it makes it cheap. That's a
Mhm.
very, very like reductive thing to say,
Yep.
but it's true. When you
Sure.
do something a
Sure.
lot, it gets cheap. And the way you do something a lot is you have to have a lot of money. You have to be making money on it. So this is like
Mhm.
the NASA versus SpaceX thing. I think that Elon's, sort of big trick that he pulled in the rocket industry is that he figured out how to make money on launch. And once you figured out how to make money on launch, you have basically turned rocketry into an evolvable technology,
How did
right?
he
And
let's stop there for a second. How did he
yeah,
figure out how to make money on lunch?
yeah. So he figured out two things. Like one, he figured out that there's the SATCOM industry, right? So there
Yep.
were
Yep.
satellites being launched for GPS and
Yep.
for cellular and these sorts of things. Not a massive industry, but it was decent sized. And then there's like NASA's needs. So NASA needs to get people back and forth from the International Space Station. And then he had this kind of seed of an idea in the back of his head, which was Starlink,
Right.
to give people internet. So basically, he looked at those three markets and he added them up,
Mm.
and he was like, "There's enough market here that I could actually sell launch as a product, and then I can own rocketry as as a tech stack underneath that." But the
Mhm.
really, really big, what I would say is like the key insight that he made and what differentiates him from every other company before him in
Mhm.
launch was that he decided to not sell rockets. So
Mm.
this is a really important point. He doesn't sell rockets; he sells launch, or he sells internet, right?
Right.
So rockets to him are a piece of
They're
the
m
tech stack
Yeah, they're the
that
pipeline. They're the
they're the
keystone
pipeline.
pipeline.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a very good
exactly.
point.
Like they're
Yep.
they're the thing that allows him to sell the product, and the product is
Right.
launch.
Right.
That's super important. And the reason it's important is because if you had tried to sell NASA a self-landing rocket in 2002, they would
Mhm.
have just said no, right? And even if you had convinced an NASA administrator, like, no, really, I figured out how to make rockets land themselves. They'd be like, okay, I guess we'll fund the development program to see if we can get that to work over 20 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
What Elon did was totally different. He said, we're not selling rockets, we're selling capability. We will sell you a certain price to get kilograms back to orbit, and don't worry about what happens to the rocket. Like, that's our business, right? So in a certain way, we're kind of doing the same thing with nuclear energy, where we don't sell nuclear reactors. We don't even sell electricity. We sell jet fuel. We sell natural gas. We sell diesel. And the way that those nuclear reactors get built and operated becomes a function of our own innovation pace. And we believe that our pace of innovation is going to be much, much faster than what would happen if we tried to go sell reactors to utilities and to governments and to cities and the way that reactors normally get sold. So I think that's a really interesting parallel with.
That's really good. Yeah. What so if you're successful, how much market share do you think you could capture in this kind of energy world?
All of it.
Because basically part of it you're arguing is like, I'm gonna make it way cheaper.
Yeah. If you can make oil and gas cheaper, and you can do that in a scalable way, and it's technology that only you can do because you've got the acceleration and the moat that nobody can catch up to, then the answer is all of it. And actually the answer is, like, at that point, it's how fast can you build? This is sort of like what happened with, sorry to keep comparing to SpaceX, but it's sort of or Tesla is a good example too. Once you have like sort of a fundamental scale moat on an industry, and you have the tech right, and you have the scale right, then it's basically like, well, how fast can you build? I don't believe that like anybody. I think SpaceX has like 90% of the launch market today, and that other 10% is like kind of performative. Like the other 10%,
that's unbelievable.
The other 10% is actually entirely performative. It's all about trying to make sure that SpaceX isn't the only company in launch. But they have the real market, and that's what happens when you like figure out a fundamental wedge that is just better than everything else, and then you chase that wedge up a scale. And that's what we're going to try to do. So I would just say, like, are we going to capture the entire energy market? Well, it's going to depend on like how fast we're able to build. So
So I want to get to this question from Dan Lenz over on Twitter. He said, what kind of technical milestones are investors hoping to see with the capital you're raising? Very, very good question.
Yeah, great question. So the first milestone, this was kind of started last July, August around then. I think I started pitching. And, I wasn't asking for a ton of money to begin with, because I was basically just a guy with a piece of paper who, was arguing that this was
with an idea
possible. I was basically I wrote about 30 pages on why this is possible, how I would go about doing it, the team I was going to hire, these sorts of things. And so there wasn't a real technical milestone. That was more of a shot in the dark, and I found somebody who believed in it. The second milestone is, can you go build a team, and can you start to technically de-risk the different areas? So there's like three major areas of technical risk here. One is nuclear reactors. The other is creating hydrogen from water using heat. And the third is synthetic hydrocarbons. And so there's kind of two de-risking factors on both of those. Like, one, is it actually technically possible? The way that you prove that is you actually design the systems and you price them out. And so you have CAD models where you say, like, this is the entire thing we're going to build. You prototype some of it to answer further questions, and you price it, and you say, like, yep, this is actually what it's going to cost when we put this on a manufacturing line. And then the second thing, so it's like feasibility. Like, one, is this even possible physically? Two, is it possible economically, and how do the economics work out? And so that's kind of where we are going into, like, a next round of funding is like, we've proved that the idea is sound, that the economics are sound, that the technical plan is sound. We've built a team that can actually go build it. Our team here at Valar Atomics has over 90 years of experience cumulatively building nuclear reactors and designing them from scratch. And so, now it's go and build it.
Wow. So have you guys figured out the cost of what it's going to take to build?
Yes, we have. It's not numbers I can share publicly, but yeah, we have a number that it's going to take to build and turn on the first reactor.
And so, um, I don't know if you can answer this question either, but
Go ahead and ask, and I'll answer whatever I can.
yeah, you'll once you have what would you call it? Like a manufacturing facility, a production facility? What are you going to call
Yep.
those? Locations.
Factory.
Yeah, factory. Okay, production factory. I assume you'll have, let's say one in Texas, one in Southeast, and one in, California, whatever. You'll have multiple locations throughout the U.S., as I assume.
Yep.
And then eventually throughout the world.
So actually, it's going to be global first. The U.S. is kind of hard to do nuclear in right now. We really want to. We're going to keep working with it, and frankly, it's just going to take a little bit longer. But
Here in the US.
we can commercialize outside the U.S. much quicker, and then it's much easier to bring a commercialized technology to the U.S. Unfortunately, there's been a little bit of an inversion here.
Yeah.
It's very disappointing that this inversion has taken place, but it's much easier to commercialize industrial technology in other places and then re-domesticate it than the other way around today.
Right.
That's not true about software. It's like the exact opposite for software. So if you want to do like deep R&D on software and deploy it somewhere, you do it in the US. You do it in San Francisco. You do that, the kernel of a thing, and then you go, and once it's already commercialized in the US, then you go copy paste other countries.
Right.
Unfortunately, in the world of deep tech and industrial engineering, it's kind of the opposite. The regulatory environment in the US has made it so that it's kind of incentivized to go anywhere else first and then to bring it back. So that's one of the things I really hope that changes, but that's how it is today.
Yeah, certainly. What countries are you thinking about? What countries are friendly to this nuclear process?
So there's a lot of countries that are really friendly on nuclear, and like, to be perfectly fair, like the U.S. is also wanting to be friendly. We just haven't really figured out the bureaucracy yet. Like, we have not figured out how to step back some of the really, really overbearing regulations that we placed on nuclear post Chernobyl and with the environmental movement. And so, like, that's a long process. But there are lots of places where that process was not enacted in the same way, and I can't say specific countries right now, but
you need to tell me offline, then.
I will tell you offline. But I'm very hopeful that the U.S. figures this out. Like, I think that everyone wants to figure it out, but bureaucracies just have a way of like not going backwards. They only really go forwards in terms of like size and restriction and stuff.
Right. What it seems like your job is probably really twofold. One is to make sure things keep moving in the right direction and you can execute, and the other is constant fundraising.
That's about right. Yeah, that's about right for the next 8 years. Yeah.
Right. How are you mapping out the fundraising process for Valar?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, what you really want to show the capital markets is that there is a significant momentum, and each time you get money, you do something extraordinary with it, and you take a huge step toward the eventual goal.
Yep.
And you just want to be on a pathway and a track record that's very easy to see and almost even to visualize. Like, you want to give want to give that upward lift, that like, yep, this plane's taking off and we need gas in the engines, but the plane's taking off. And the way that you do that is you have to kind of gate out your capabilities and gate out what you want to get done at which time. So I would love to go and build a factory today, and just like go get $500 million and just go build a factory and start turning on reactors.
Right.
But in reality, that's not how capital works, but it's also not how technology works either. So there's actually a bit of an alignment here where, you actually need to start small with technology. This is a mistake that a lot of other nuclear companies make. They want to just go build a factory, and they don't want to do R&D. And one of the reasons they don't want to do R&D is because in nuclear, R&D is very expensive and difficult. It's really hard to turn on one nuclear reactor.
Right.
But and so it's so hard to turn on one. They're like, well, we might as well go turn on 100, with a factory all at the same time, because it's like not that much harder to do that than to turn on one.
Right.
But the problem is you don't actually really know what that factory should look like until you've operated reactors. Like you
Right.
have to actually get operating experience with a small reactor, and then
Right.
with a bigger one, and then with a bigger
Right.
one. And that's just how technology develops. You start small, you make, increasingly larger and more complex things, and then you know how to actually go build a factory.
So have you guys hired like a nuclear engineer? Like what's the makeup of your staff right now?
Yeah, so we have 6 nuclear engineers who, yeah, like I said, they've got 90 years combined experience building and operating nuclear reactors. They've built some of the most awesome reactors and reactor concepts, all kind of from the modular space.
Yep.
And yeah, it's fun. We're
Mhm.
in seat designing today, and we're making a thermal prototype this year. So basically, we're making the entire reactor. It's going to be here in the lab, and we're going to use electrical resistance to sort of
Mhm.
mimic, um, nuclear fuel. And then we're
Mhm.
going to go take that thermal prototype and mature it basically into a real nuclear reactor that will get fueled.
Yeah.
I'd love to
I
answer
got
some of these questions, by the way.
yeah,
I think we've got,
I was bringing up Connor up on the screen if you can see it, Connor
yeah.
McCabe. He said, "Are you converting the water to hydrogen to get to the Sabatier reaction or mixing straight water and CO2?" He's just curious about the thermodynamics behind all this. Man, you guys are starting to get way above my head already.
Yeah, great question. So we're not using Sabatier. Sabatier is how you get methane. And we will probably do that at some point, but we want to start with long chain hydrocarbons because they're more expensive and we can make more money. They're also liquids, which means they're easier to transport.
Mhm.
So the way you get long chain hydrocarbons is with Fischer-Tropsch, is
Mhm.
that reaction. It's very similar to Sabatier. It's just a different set of catalysts and a different set of temperatures and pressures. And that will create a spectrum of hydrocarbons, including like long chain liquid
Mhm.
hydrocarbons. But to answer the first question, it's not straight water and CO2. We first get hydrogen from water, and then we take the hydrogen CO2
Mhm.
into Fischer-Tropsch. And that water to hydrogen process is actually, I would say, like the real key to why this is going to be cheaper. If you're
Mhm.
doing synthetic hydrocarbons today, you are basically paying an enormous amount of money for hydrogen. And
Mhm.
that's why it's cheaper. It's way more expensive than oil and gas because it's not
Mhm.
because the CO2 cost. It's because of the hydrogen cost. And
Mhm.
so nuclear is what allows us to actually get super cheap hydrogen because it's so energy dense and you can get
Right.
energy for so cheap.
Right.
That's what allows us to do that conversion.
Yeah.
And yeah,
That
Dan,
is
it's Sabatier. I agree. I read that word for years before I said it out loud for the first time, and yeah.
you got lambasted for
Yeah, exactly.
interesting. Well, you guys, we'll be wrapping up here pretty soon, but any more questions you guys want to ask, please chime in. I can monitor questions on YouTube, Facebook, and apparently Twitter is now, I used to not be able to monitor questions on Twitter, but now I can. So if you ask any questions, we'll be able to get to them there. One of the things, Isaiah, that we talked actually before you left and had lunch, and it seems like one of the things I like about what you're doing is like big, it's a big idea. It's going to take a lot to bring to reality. It's going to take a lot of money to get there. But on the other side of that, if the risks that you're taking pan out, there's this, it's in one sense the sky's the limit in the market. It's like,
Yep.
yeah, as we said earlier, you look at lawnmowers to cars to whatever. That's your market. Airplanes. So the
Yep.
big idea behind it, and a lot of people have been risk averse to these long term ideas. They want the short term payout and all that. Kind of what uh, and this is going to be a journey for you. I mean, you're gonna go through some ups and downs, and so some R&D frustration, and then
Oh yeah.
just to even get to those 8 years, right? I'm sure you already hit some of those walls.
It's a daily.
So
Oh man, it's a daily. It's so over.
so
We're so back cycle every single day.
so it's got to be like massive sanctification with your walk with the Lord. Trusting in Him for
Absolutely.
these ideas and the money and the team and everything coming together. And then, Lord willing, your idea is good. It sounds like a lot of your research and science behind it solid and everything, but you still got to make it all fit together. So how are you kind of like bringing your team along, keeping people engaged, keeping your wife, trusting the process and all that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, like Sophie is just the absolute killer. Like I don't know how to. I mean, I feel like every guy says that, but like actually, it's insane how much that she is able to. I mean, I will disappear for weeks to go to another country to try to turn on this reactor and this kind of stuff. And she's just such a champion. So yeah, marry well. That's one piece of advice. um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, she's amazing. But
And then
yeah,
kind
I
of the
mean, like yes,
company and your team and just kind of, I mean, because this is gonna be a long road and a slog.
yeah, oh yeah. I mean, it's gonna be years and years before we are at that point of
Yep.
like the company has made it.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. Right.
but yeah, I mean, the mission is just so exciting. Like, it's just so
Yeah.
exciting to actually be doing nuclear
Right.
because the industry just has not been building anything for so long, and we're
hmm
kind of like build first. Like,
hmm
we are building a nuclear reactor, and there's a lot of strategies we can follow to get it approved and get it turned on. But like the
hmm
fundamental thing that the team is doing is building a nuclear reactor. And that's
Yeah.
super exciting. And
Right.
then the mission of like we can actually make fuel cheaper,
hmm
and we can make it on Mars. That's a huge thing. Like that's a huge motivation for me. Is like the way that Starship is actually like scalable on Mars is that they need to be able to make um,
Fuel.
methane. And yeah, they need to
Yeah.
be able to make methane out of the regolith. In order to do that, you need nuclear energy. There's not really a solution to do that other than nuclear.
Right.
And so I know if we get really good at this on Earth, we can do really well on on other planets as well. So yeah, I mean it's an incredibly exciting thing, and the more that you learn about energy, the more that you see how much it is underneath everything else. I mean, even
Right.
like the AI stuff that's going on right now, and we're sort of starting to see an inflection in AI. It's
Yeah.
bottlenecked on energy. Everyone
Right.
who's Sam Altman is saying that
Interesting.
everyone's
Yeah.
actually doing AI, saying like, yeah, this is really like an energy problem at this point. So
Wow.
I think that we're really tackling one of the most important problems on Earth, and I think that we're going to have an incredibly exciting time along the way building it.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you really have to you have to even it out though. Like it is really day to day. Like wow, it's so over, and the next day we're so back.
hmm
Extreme excitement, extreme trepidation,
Mm.
and you just have to be able to walk on the beach in the hard moments and give it up to God. And then when it's extremely exciting, you have to be able to thank Him,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you keep trucking and you never
Mhm.
stop.
So kind of a combined question here. Yek, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, Yek over at Twitter and Velvet over on Facebook, kind of asking similar questions here. But what do you know about your competitors, their progress in producing, and then kind of Yek Nada over on Twitter is kind of asking, how are you handling IP given the syn fuels and the hydrogen and nuclear have so many competitors already?
Yeah, so these are good questions, and it's going to sound like I'm like dunking on the people who are asking these questions. I'm not trying to, but I think that this actually highlights like a common misperception in how industrial companies work.
Yeah.
Lots of people like quote invented everything about SpaceX before SpaceX,
Right.
meaning we
Right.
knew how to land rockets in theory. Like the G
Right.
fold algorithm was developed way before rockets landed themselves. In fact, it was used to do like self landing rockets on the moon. Right.
hmm
The lunar lander is a self landing rocket.
Right.
Um, so like, and that was in the 60s. So the way that industrial technologies actually win is not really through IP, and it's not really through having no competitors who are doing certain parts of what they're doing. The way that you win is doing the entire thing really well.
hmm
It's really like integrating and getting good at everything that your business needs to succeed and doing it really well all at the same time, and then actually pulling it off. So
hmm
like yeah, there are companies who are working on nuclear. There are companies who are working on hydrogen production. There are companies who are working on syn fuels.
Uh-huh.
Um, there is no company that is working on all three of those things, manufacturing it all themselves, creating their own sites. No other
Mhm.
company on earth is doing that.
Uh-huh.
And honestly, even if another company started doing that, and there will be copycats, we already are aware of a couple people who are thinking about jumping in.
Right.
I'm not worried about it. And the
Mhm.
reason is because I'm already building the best team in the world who's so focused and who's so motivated. And yeah, like we're just going to go so hard on it that nobody else
Yeah.
is going to be able to follow in a million years. So
Yeah. Bro, love what you're doing, man. Thanks for all your time, and thanks for what you're doing, and praying for you, and
of course, dude,
praying for money to come through, good investors to come
let's
your
go.
way. Yeah, let's do it, man. Let's go.
All right, man.
Love that big idea. So you can go now. Thank you, everyone, for tuning
Great
in
combo, man.
to
Yep.
Business Makers. And as I said at
Have
the
a
very
good one.
beginning of the show, yeah, you too, Isaiah. Thank you. We have our Prodigal America Conference in October, and we do our pre-Business Makers Conference. It's in Fort Worth, Texas. We're doing our pre-Business Makers Conference. It's a fantastic kind of Thursday afternoon, real tight. One talk at 1 p.m., 2 p.m., 3 p.m., 4 p.m. We have the owner of T-Rex Arms coming out to speak. We have a Doan Creative Agency coming out to speak, the CEO of Doan Creative Agency, and then we have Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room, Blaze TV network, coming to speak to us at the pre-business conference. So love to see you guys there. Go to fightlaughfeast.com to sign up for that. Make sure you follow us on Twitter. And if you want to be in a conversation with us, you can email us at contact@fightlaughfeast.com. Thank you guys for tuning in. I really appreciate Isaiah and the big idea, the big mind that he has. We need to be thinking big as Christians and business leaders in this brave new world that we're in. So thank you for tuning in to Business Makers. We'll see you every Friday about 9:30 Pacific time here live. Thank you very much.
Today we are going to be talking about the Kyle Rittenhouse Always Ready bundle available at armoredrepublic.com. It's a very practical kit, including everything that you need, all the way from hydration to first aid to general purpose to magazine holders and to a very comfortable plate carrier. So included is the Testudo Gen 3 plate carrier, and we also have 2 C3 plates that I've included in the bundle. So these plates are multi-curve, multi-hit ceramic, so they can take multiple rounds. I really like these plates because it's going to offer level 4 protection. Thank you guys for watching. Again, you can go to armoredrepublic.com, linked below, and you can purchase your Kyle Rittenhouse Always Ready bundle today.
The Bible appears more to whisper when it comes to sexual sin.
Are we going to keep bickering over secondary issues?
You asking me out on a date?
America has squandered her inheritance far too long. It's time she repents and returns home to her Father.